Stephen froze solid. His lungs tightened, and his heart seemed to forget how to beat. Directly in front of him, 10 paces away, stood 2 fully grown wolves. Their gray silhouettes were sharply defined against the snow-covered forest, and their yellow eyes tracked his every move without blinking. "This is it," Stephen whispered, his lips barely moving as he instinctively reached for his shotgun. His fingers fumbled in his jacket pocket for cartridges. Empty. Only now did he remember that in his haste he'd forgotten to load his double-barreled shotgun after cleaning it. "This is the end, you old fool!" A thought flashed through his mind. The wolves advanced slowly, crouching low to the ground and baring their fangs. Their growls cut through the silence of the winter forest. Stephen gripped his shotgun tighter, a useless piece of metal, but the only thing that offered an illusion of protection. His thoughts raced, frantically reviewing escape options that, by all appearances, didn't exist. Suddenly, from his right, came a cracking of branches. Stephen turned his head. From behind the trees emerged a third wolf, larger than the others. The wolf approached its companions, then stood between them and the man. For a few seconds it stared intently into Stephen's face, its head tilted slightly. The seconds stretched into an eternity, and then something incredible happened. Before we begin, please tell us what city you're from, subscribe, hit the like button, and watch until the end. Here we go. 2 years ago, the truck roared laboriously, making its way along the bumpy track. Outside the window, bleak landscapes of the northern back country drifted by. Fields, small woodlands, and scattered hamlets clinging to the road like beggars outside a church. Stephen Veresov sat next to the driver, clutching a worn briefcase tightly on his lap. At 65, he was embarking on the craziest act of his measured life, fleeing his past to a remote wilderness where no one knew him. "Where on earth are you headed, old-timer?" asked the driver, a young man with an earring. "Pine Ridge hasn't seen a living soul for 10 years, apart from hunters and berry pickers in summer." "I have a house there," Stephen replied curtly. "My folks' place." "Ah, a weekend cottager then," the young man drawled. "Summer, I get it, but in winter, aren't you scared? Bears, wolves?" "What's there for me to be scared of?" Stephen adjusted his cap. "I've lived my life. What's meant to be, will be." The driver gave his passenger a strange look, but asked no more questions. Stephen turned to the window. He didn't mention that the house had come to him from a distant relative, or that he was originally from Maple Creek, an industrial town a couple of 100 miles away, that he'd worked as an engineer for 40 years at a plant, diligently toiling, saving for his retirement. He didn't share how meticulously he'd planned everything. He and Vera would travel, dote on their grandchildren, putter in the garden once he retired. It never happened. Vera passed away 6 months ago. Heart failure. Quickly, almost without suffering. And she left him with an empty apartment where, after 50 years together, every corner, every object reminded him of her. His children had moved on, his son in the city, his daughter across the country. They visited, called, invited him to stay. He refused, and then he made his decision. "All right, old-timer, we're here." The driver's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "This is Pine Ridge. As agreed, I'll take you right to your house." Stephen looked around. The village stretched along the road. About a dozen houses, half of them abandoned. Chimneys and roofs blanketed in snow. No signs of life, save for smoke from a couple of chimneys. That one, the blue one, with the carved trim. Stephen pointed to a house at the end of the street. The truck pulled up to the gate. Stephen paid, declined help with his belongings, and stepped out into the freezing air. The driver said something else, tried to leave his phone number, but Stephen just shook his head. "Good luck, old man." The young fellow waved and drove off, leaving the elderly man in the midst of white silence. The gate creaked open. In the yard, Stephen was greeted by Patches, a shaggy mutt of indeterminate age whom he'd taken in 3 years prior during one of his rare visits here. The locals had fed her while her owner was away. "Well, hello, Patches." Stephen stroked the dog's head. "Now you and I are here to stay." The dog wagged her tail as if she understood. Loyalty and joy at seeing her owner shone in her eyes. "You won't leave me, will you?" Stephen asked quietly, and Patches, as if in answer, licked his hand. The house met him with a chill and the scent of an unused space. Stephen lit the stove, unpacked the few belongings he'd brought, and sat by the window, gazing at the snow-covered fields and the dark wall of trees in the distance. "Here's to a new life," he thought, not knowing whether he was happy or afraid of it. The first few months flew by in a flurry of activity. He needed to get the house in order, prepare the garden for spring, and establish his routine. Stephen built a new smokehouse, mended the roof, and repaired the fence. Work distracted him from heavy thoughts, and fatigue granted him dreamless sleep. In the village, it turned out, only 7 people lived, mostly retirees like himself. His closest neighbor was Mrs. Henderson, a former teacher and a widow like him. Sometimes they'd have tea, reminiscing about the past, but mostly Stephen preferred to spend his time alone or with Patches. "Stephen, you should be careful in the woods," Mrs. Henderson would say when he went hunting. "There are a lot of wolves about these days. The game warden from the district came by to warn us." "I'm used to it," Stephen waved her off. "My shotgun's reliable, and Patches can sense them a mile away." Hunting became for him not so much a way to get food as an opportunity to be alone with nature. He loved those hours, the silence, the crunch of branches underfoot, the fresh air infused with the scent of pine and moss, and Patches by his side, a faithful friend and helper. "You understand everything, old girl," he'd tell the dog, scratching her behind the ear. "Sometimes I think you understand more than all people put together." Patches looked at him with intelligent eyes and seemed to agree. One day Stephen returned from the forest with 2 rabbits. Meeting Mrs. Henderson at the well, he offered her one of the carcasses. "Thank you, Stephen," the woman said. "You know, you've changed since you arrived. You look brighter somehow." "Really?" he asked, surprised. "Definitely. When you first came, you looked like a trapped wolf. Now you seem to have thawed out." Stephen pondered this. Perhaps the deep woods really did heal his emotional wounds better than all the psychologists in the world ever could. "Mrs. Henderson, what was all that noise yesterday on the outskirts of town? Some trucks." "Oh, that was the timber crew." His neighbor waved her hand. "They're clearing timber. They say it's all legal. They have permits. But now the animals will be coming closer to the homes." "They're not touching the hunting grounds, are they?" "Who knows? Old man Fred was complaining that someone's been taking his traps. I think it's poachers. We've got good fishing and hunting around here, plenty of game, so they come from everywhere." Stephen frowned. He disliked poachers. A true hunter knows moderation, takes only what's needed for sustenance, doesn't raid nests, doesn't bother young animals, But these— "Keep an eye on Patches," Mrs. Henderson suddenly said. "There have been cases of dogs being poisoned, and yours is a beautiful dog, running with you through the woods. She has a good nose." Stephen nodded, tightening his grip on the rope holding the rabbit carcasses. "Let's go, Patches," he called to the dog, who was thoughtfully gazing toward the forest. "You'll get plenty of running tomorrow." Time flew by unnoticed. Winter gave way to spring, then came the short northern summer, and soon the blizzard swirled again. One cold February morning, Stephen woke to a strange silence. Usually Patches would meet him at the porch, tail wagging joyfully. But today the dog was nowhere to be seen. "Patches!" Stephen called, stepping outside. "Patches, where are you?" Silence. Only the wind whistled between the buildings, stirring up snow dust. His heart tightened with alarm. Stephen walked around the yard, checked the shed, the smokehouse. Patches was nowhere. "Patches!" he shouted louder, but only an echo replied. Donning his sheepskin coat and grabbing his shotgun, Stephen went to look for the dog. He scoured the area, asked the neighbors, checked the road to the bus stop. No one had seen Patches. By evening, frozen and desperate, he returned home. And there he noticed tracks in the snow near the gate, dog tracks, and human tracks beside them. The tracks led into the forest. "Damn it!" Stephen swore, remembering his conversation with his neighbor about poachers. The next morning he set out again to search. The forest was silent. Too silent. Stephen followed the tracks, which would disappear, then reappear. After several hours of wandering, he was exhausted and sat down on a fallen tree. "Patches!" he called out one last time without hope. Suddenly a faint sound reached him, a whimper or a moan. Stephen sprang to his feet and ran towards the sound. Beyond a thick bush, in a ravine, he saw his dog. Patches lay on her side, breathing heavily. Next to her lay a piece of meat with a distinct greenish tinge. "Patches, my girl." Stephen fell to his knees beside the dog. Patches weakly wagged her tail, recognizing her owner. Her eyes were glazed and foam dripped from her mouth. Stephen scooped the dog into his arms and, feeling no weight, ran toward the house. He called the district veterinarian, pleaded for him to come, promised any amount of money. But the roads were snowed in, and the vet didn't make it. By nightfall, Patches was gone. Stephen sat next to the cooling body of his friend, stroking her coarse fur, and for the first time since his wife's death, he wept. "Forgive me, my girl," he whispered. "I didn't protect you." In the morning, he dug a grave in the frozen ground and buried Patches under the old pine tree by the house. There were no prayers, no speeches, only the heavy silence of a man who had lost his last friend. "You all leave me," Stephen said, tossing a handful of earth onto the mound. "All of you?" The days dragged on in a gray blur. Stephen barely left the house, didn't heat the smokehouse, neglected his chores. The empty dog collar hung on a nail by the door as a reminder of his loss. Mrs. Henderson came, knocked, brought food, but Stephen only thanked her curtly and closed the door. He didn't want to talk to anyone. Again, as after Vera's death, a sense of meaninglessness washed over everything. His children called, invited him to stay. Stephen refused, saying everything was fine. He didn't want to be a burden. And what would he do in the city anyway? Here, in the forest, even in his grief, he felt at home. Spring arrived suddenly. The snow began to melt, revealing last year's grass and damp earth. There was a smell of dampness and new life. One day Stephen realized He couldn't stay cooped up indoors any longer. He took his shotgun and headed into the woods, not for game, just to wander, to clear his head. The forest greeted him with dripping water and bird songs. Stephen walked, breathing in the fresh air, and gradually felt the weight lift from his heart. Nature lived its own life, indifferent to human suffering, and there was something comforting in that. Suddenly, he heard a strange sound, not a bird's cry, not an animal's roar, but something in between. Stephen cautiously moved towards the sound and soon saw a peculiar sight. A wolf pup was struggling in a snare trap. Quite small, about 3 or 4 months old, a gray bundle with yellow, frightened eyes. Hearing human footsteps, it struggled harder, only tightening the noose around its paw. Stephen raised his shotgun. A poacher's trap, by all appearances. The pup whimpered pitifully, looking at the man. "Well, another victim," Stephen murmured, slowly lowering his shotgun. Something in the creature's eyes touched his heart. Perhaps desperation, perhaps fear, or perhaps the same unspoken question that had been in Patch's eyes in the last hours of her life. Why? Stephen looked around. No sign of a she-wolf nearby. Probably the poachers had scared her off or killed her. The pup seemed to have been here for several hours. Its paw was swollen, and there was blood. One shot to end its misery. The thought flashed, but Stephen pushed it away. Instead, he carefully approached the trap. The pup growled, trying to appear fierce, but it didn't quite work. It sounded more like a plaintive whimper. "Quiet, little one, quiet," Stephen said in a soothing voice. "I'll help." He took off his jacket, covered the pup with it so it wouldn't bite, and set about dismantling the trap. The creature trembled but didn't resist, as if it understood that help was being offered. When the trap finally yielded, Stephen gently freed the pup's paw. It was badly injured, bones likely broken. "You won't survive in the woods with a paw like that," Stephen said, examining the wound, "and releasing you would be condemning you to death." The pup looked at him with yellow eyes, in which fear, pain, and something Stephen couldn't quite identify, trust, swam. "Oh, Vera wouldn't have understood me." Stephen sighed and resolutely wrapped the pup in his jacket. "Come on, you poor little thing. We'll try to nurse you back to health." Mrs. Henderson just gasped when Stephen showed her his new pet. "You've lost your mind, Stephen. That's a wolf, a wild animal." "For now it's a pup," Stephen countered. "Still small, innocent. When it gets big, I'll let it go." "What if it bites you? What if it's rabid?" "It's not rabid, and if it bites me, well, that's how my life will end. I'm not afraid." His neighbor shook her head but didn't argue. She only brought iodine, bandages, and an old children's veterinary book, all she had in the house. For the first few days the pup was weak and listless. It lay in a corner on an old blanket, refused food, and whimpered pitifully. Stephen applied ointment to its wound, changed the bandages, and talked to it, just so the creature would get used to a human voice. "I'll call you Gray," he told the pup on the 3rd day. "Do you mind?" The pup lifted its head and looked at the man with an attentive gaze. Stephen could have sworn that understanding flickered in those yellow eyes. Gradually, Gray began to eat, first milk, then meat broth, and then solid food. The injured paw healed slowly, but it was clear the pup would never walk normally on it again. "It knit crooked, brother," Stephen sighed, watching Gray's first attempts to walk. "You'll be lame." The pup paid no attention to its handicap. It hobbled around the house, sometimes falling awkwardly, but immediately got up and continued its journey. With each passing day, it grew more attached to Stephen. It would meet him at the door when he returned from outside, sleep by his bed, and allow him to stroke its head. Sometimes it even played, grabbing a stick Stephen threw with its teeth and bringing it back, exactly as Patches used to. "Look at you! You've become just like a dog," Stephen marveled. "Tamed." But he knew it wasn't true. From time to time something wild, primal, would flash in Gray's movements. It could sit by the window for hours, staring at the forest, and when a wolf howl echoed from that direction, it would jump up and pace restlessly around the room. "It draws you there, I understand." Stephen would nod. "Your element." In summer, he began letting the pup out into the yard. He built an enclosure for it with a kennel, similar to Patches. Gray grew quickly, transforming from an awkward puppy into a powerful creature with thick gray fur and intelligent eyes. Neighbors looked askance, avoiding Stephen's house. Mrs. Henderson was the only one who wasn't afraid of Gray. "He looks at you differently than others," she observed one day. "Just like a person, he understands everything." "Maybe he does," Stephen agreed. "Sometimes I think he's smarter than a lot of people." By autumn, Gray had grown strong and mature. He no longer fit in the kennel, and Stephen expanded the enclosure. But more and more often he noticed the wolf looking towards the forest, sniffing the wind, pacing restlessly in the enclosure. "Are you pining, brother?" Stephen would ask. "Is the wild blood calling?" Gray would approach, nuzzle the man's hand, but his eyes remained wary, wild, and Stephen understood. It was time to say goodbye. Though the thought of new solitude was unbearable, he knew that keeping the wolf in captivity any longer was a crime against its nature. One evening, as a cold wind blew from the north and the forest turned crimson, Stephen heard a distant howl, and Gray answered it, a low, drawn-out sound that resonated with pain in the old man's heart. "Your kin are calling," Stephen said, opening the enclosure. "Go!" Gray darted out, ran a few paces, stopped, and looked back at the man. A question was in his eyes. "Go, you foolish thing!" Stephen waved his hand. "This is your life, your destiny. Go to your own." The wolf watched him for another moment, then, limping on its hind leg, ran towards the forest. At the edge of the woods, it paused again, turned its head as if to say goodbye, and disappeared among the trees. "That's it, then," Stephen whispered, feeling something break inside him. Alone again. He returned to the house, sat by the window, and stared for a long time at where Gray had vanished. That night he thought he heard a howl, not mournful, but triumphant, free, and from that his heart felt a little lighter. That winter was harsh. The frosts were so bitter that trees cracked and birds froze in mid-flight. Stephen kept the stove burning from morning till night, but still woke up cold. "We didn't expect such a brutal February." Mrs. Henderson shook her head, having dropped by to check on her neighbor. "The old-timers say there hasn't been a winter like this in 30 years. "We'll get through it." Stephen waved her off. "It's not my first time." But deep down he was worried. Not for himself, for Gray. Had the wolf survived such cold? Had the pack accepted him with his injured paw? Had he managed to hunt for food? Old fool, he chided himself, thinking of a beast as if it were human. A wolf is a wolf. They've survived thousands of years without people. But the worry wouldn't leave him. One morning, Stephen woke to a strange sound, a scraping or scratching. The sound came from the front door. Donning his sheepskin coat, he cautiously approached and listened. The scratching repeated, followed by a soft whimper. Gray? A crazy thought flashed. Stephen flung open the door. On the porch lay a motionless rabbit carcass, still warm. Beside it, in the snow, were distinctive tracks, wolf tracks, with the imprint of a lame paw. Gray, Stephen breathed, peering into the darkness. He thought he saw a gray silhouette flit among the trees, but perhaps it was his imagination. Stephen picked up the rabbit. Its throat was cleanly severed with a precise, confident bite. A hunter's kill. So, he survived, he murmured, and he learned to hunt, even with a bad paw. That day, Stephen stewed the rabbit into a hearty soup, and as he filled his own bowl, he placed a second one on the porch. "To our reunion," he said, raising a mug of moonshine. "To you, Gray." In the morning, the bowl was empty. This happened several more times. A rabbit, a grouse, and once even a young deer appeared on the porch. Stephen never saw his wolf, but he knew it was him, Gray, sharing his kill. "Look at that," he'd tell Mrs. Henderson. "A wild animal, yet it remembers kindness, unlike people." "Aren't you afraid?" his neighbor would ask. "He's still a wild animal." "What's there to be afraid of? He won't hurt me. He understands." And Stephen truly wasn't afraid. Stepping out into the yard at night, he sometimes felt a steadfast gaze from the darkness, but it didn't scare him. On the contrary, there was something comforting in it, to know he wasn't entirely alone, that someone was watching, protecting. By spring, the gifts appeared less frequently and then stopped altogether. Stephen wasn't surprised. The wolf pack was nomadic, following the game. Gray had left with his kin, and that was right. "Goodbye, Gray," Stephen mentally whispered, closing the shutters before bed, and for some reason he was sure the wolf, wherever he was, heard him. And then came that day, the day of the encounter in the forest. To get to the very root of the story, it's worth saying that Stephen didn't just go into the woods for no reason. A rumor had spread in the village about poachers setting traps for fur-bearing animals. Stephen decided to check the remote trails where he had found Gray the previous year. He went deeper than usual, absorbed in his search, and didn't notice the twilight drawing in, and then he got lost. In a forest he thought he knew like the back of his hand. His compass failed him, the needle spinning wildly. Stephen trudged, trying to maintain one direction, but the forest seemed to lead him in circles. Dusk descended rapidly, transforming the familiar outlines of trees into ominous silhouettes. A shiver ran down the old man's spine when he realized he had completely lost his bearings. He was circling in one spot like a lost child. His legs ached with fatigue, his lungs burned from the frosty air. "Ah, old age is no joy," Stephen muttered, leaning against a pine trunk. "Where's the path?" Suddenly, a branch snapped, piercing the silence. Stephen froze. Another sound, faint but distinct, the rustle of snow under someone's paws. Slowly, heart pounding, he turned and saw them. 2 wolves, large gray with eyes glowing in the gloom. They stood motionless, like phantoms that had appeared from nowhere. One bared its teeth, revealing yellow fangs. The other crouched low, ready to spring. Stephen felt a chill spread through him. His hand shot to his shotgun, but his fingers only found empty chambers for cartridges. Only now did he remember with horror that he hadn't loaded the weapon after cleaning it. My God, what a foolish way to die! Flashed through his mind. His feet seemed rooted to the snow. Running was pointless. They would catch him. Shouting, no one would hear. Waving the shotgun, it would only provoke the predators. The first wolf stepped forward. The fur on its neck bristled, and a guttural growl rumbled from its throat. Stephen felt his knees betray him, threatening to buckle. "So this is what death is like," he whispered, strangely at peace with the inevitable. At that instant, a loud snap sounded from the right. Something massive was moving through the undergrowth, breaking branches. Another wolf? Stephen clutched the useless shotgun tighter. If he was destined to die, at least with some dignity. From behind the trees emerged a third wolf, gigantic, with thick silvery fur, a scar across its muzzle, a true alpha. With every step it lurched strangely to its right, as if it had a limp in its hind leg. Stephen held his breath. His heart skipped a beat. The limping wolf stopped between its kin and the man. It looked directly into Stephen's eyes, a long, searching gaze. In the beast's amber eyes, something that shouldn't be in a wild animal was readable. Recognition, memory, understanding. "Gray?" Stephen's voice trembled. "Is that really you?" The wolf tilted its head to one side, exactly as it had done as a pup when it didn't understand what was wanted from it. This gesture was so human. The two other predators shifted restlessly, not understanding why their leader hesitated. One even made a move towards the man, but the limping wolf stopped it with a short, sharp snarl, authoritative, not tolerating dissent. The old man and the wolf looked at each other, separated by space and a species chasm, yet connected by something stronger. Memory. Memory of rescue, of pain, of care, of a warm home in bitter cold. The limping wolf approached, so close that Stephen could feel the scent of its breath. A crazy thought flashed to reach out, touch the thick fur, stroke it as he once had. But the wolf backed away. It turned to its pack and let out a low, commanding sound, a call. And then, without looking back, it moved away, leading its kin behind it. Stephen watched the retreating gray shadows, and only when they disappeared among the trees did he feel his legs give way. He sank onto the snow, pulling off his cap with trembling hands. Tears streamed down his wrinkled cheeks, from the terror he just experienced, from relief, from the realization of the miracle that had just unfolded before his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered into the darkness. "Thank you, Gray." It was an hour later before he found the strength to get up and, orienting himself by the stars, trudged towards home. He kept looking back, as if expecting to see the limping wolf again, but the forest was silent, plunged into a frosty sleep. Stephen sat on the porch, watching the setting sun. A week had passed since the day Gray saved him from his own kind. A debt of remembrance, Stephen murmured into the emptiness. He repaid his debt to me. The old man understood that it wasn't just a repayment of a debt. There was something more to this story, something beyond human comprehension. Animal loyalty, or natural gratitude, or perhaps that very moment of mutual understanding that unites all living things on earth. The gate creaked shut. Stephen turned. Mrs. Henderson was coming towards the house with a basket. "Brought you some mushrooms, Stephen," she smiled. "Picked them myself." "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. Come sit, we'll have some tea." They sat on the porch, drinking tea with berry jam and remaining silent. A comfortable silence, without tension. "You never did tell me what happened to you in the woods," his neighbor finally asked. You came back pale as a ghost, trembling." Stephen paused, turning his empty teacup in his hands. Then he sighed. "It's a long story, Mrs. Henderson, and you wouldn't believe me." "Well, try me," she smiled. "I have a vivid imagination." And Stephen told her everything, from beginning to end, about Patches, about the wolf pup, about the farewell and the gifts, about the encounter in the forest. Mrs. Henderson listened without interrupting, only occasionally shaking her head or raising her eyebrows. "So that's the story," Stephen concluded. "Unbelievable, you'll say. Why should I?" The woman shrugged. "Life holds stranger things, especially in the wild. The woods, they keep many secrets." They fell silent again, watching dusk settle over the forest. "My son called, wants me to move in with him," Stephen suddenly said. "Says I've been out here by myself long enough." "And what did you say?" "I refused. Where would I go from the wilderness? This is my home now. This is all mine." Mrs. Henderson nodded understandingly. "That's right. Nature, it heals, and it binds you stronger than any chains." Stephen looked at the dark wall of the forest. He thought he saw a familiar silhouette flit at the edge of the woods. A wolf? Or a trick of the imagination? "Let me tell you something, Mrs. Henderson," he said, not taking his eyes off the forest. "It's human nature to consider ourselves the pinnacle of creation, like we're smart, we're feeling, we understand everything, and animals are just instincts." "That's true," his neighbor agreed. "But the longer I live, the more I realize we're not much different from them. And in some ways we're even inferior. They don't know how to lie, they don't betray, they don't kill for sport. A wolf won't kill another wolf out of envy or greed, but a human—" Stephen sighed, recalling his long life, the wars and revolutions that had overturned the country, the human envy and cruelty he had witnessed. "Gray saved me because he remembered kindness. Simple gratitude, you understand? Not reasoning, not profit, but a pure, unadulterated feeling. You helped me, I'll help you. That's real, that's right." Mrs. Henderson silently placed her hand over his. "It's late now," she said, rising. "I should go. Thanks for the tea, Stephen." She left, and Stephen remained sitting on the porch. It was completely dark now, and stars appeared in the sky, bright, large, as they only are far from city lights. And suddenly, from the north, came a long wolf howl. It floated over the forest, over the fields, carried by the wind, sad and triumphant at the same time. A second voice joined the first, then a third, a whole choir. Stephen closed his eyes, listening to this wild primal music, and he smiled. "I hear you, Gray," he mentally whispered. "And you hear me. We are connected forever." And it seemed to him that in the wolf choir one voice, strong and low, was sounding specifically for him, as an answer, as confirmation, a debt of remembrance, a bridge across the chasm between man and wild beast, understanding that needs no words. Stephen stood up, took one last look at the dark forest, and went into the house. For the first time in a long time, his heart felt calm and light. And somewhere deep in the forest, on a moonlit hill, stood a large gray wolf. He watched the distant light in the window of a solitary house at the edge of the village and knew that there, beyond that window, was his human, the one who had once given him life, the one he would now protect as long as he had the strength. Thank you for reading. What do you think of this story? Share your thoughts. Your comments are very valuable to us.